Welcome to Business as Unusual. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, so if you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat, and I'll try to get to all of them during our session. We've got a jam-packed session today, so please keep them coming in early and often. I'm Kathy Steele and the CEO of Red Caffeine and your host today. For those of you unfamiliar with Red Caffeine, we're a growth consultancy and we build and execute go-to-market plans for ambitious mid-market companies. Our service offering includes a fractional team led by a senior level marketing leader that enables a business to scale rapidly without hiring a wide range of full-time staff members to move a growth plan forward. And today we're going to talk about mastering modern HR and navigating the changing labor market, which is a really important growth lane for us. So, in this ever evolving world of business, the role of human resources department has transformed dramatically, as we were talking about as we were prepping for this. Gone are the days when HR was merely about hiring and firing. Today, it's about building a brand, fostering a culture, and ensuring that organizations attract the right talent and nurture and retain them. So, central to this transformation is the concept of employment branding, and it's the heartbeat of our company's culture, values, and vision. But how do we tie that into the broader spectrum of modern HR practices? So, today on Business as Unusual, we're going to dive into what is the modern makeup of the HR department? How have these roles and responsibilities evolved and shifted? And what does it take to find the right individual or team to fulfill the dynamic needs of today's business? We're also going to talk about outsourcing. As the popularity of fractional resources surges, especially during leaner economic periods, we'll explore the benefits and challenges of leveraging these part time specialized talents for HR functions. When should companies tap into external expertise, and when is it more strategic to rely on in house capabilities? We're also going to dive into cultivating a harmonious workplace culture. We'll talk about understanding the strategies companies can employ to create a workplace environment that resonates with both new recruits and seasoned professionals. And then, how can organizations ensure that its culture is inclusive, progressive, and aligned with its employment brand? So, whether you're an HR professional or a business leader, it's crucial to growth to elevate our talent plans. Our people are truly the backbone of our businesses. So, we're fortunate to have two incredible thought leaders join us on BAU today. Our guest, Sandra Teague, who's the Director of Human Capital Management at RSM. And in her current role, Sandra is uniquely positioned to guide employers in improving their human capital strategy by utilizing HR outsourcing and other HR consulting services. And fan favorite, Lynn Fayomi, my co-host today. She's president and CEO of HR Source, and they're a Chicago-based employers association with over 1,200 members organization. So she knows a thing or two about HR operations as well. So I'm going to start today's question with a icebreaker for Sandra. We're really thrilled to have you today on BAU. Could you share something about yourself that is not on your bio?
Sure. Well, thank you, Kathy. First of all, for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and talk about this. To talk about this topic. Yeah. So I think what's in my stage of life, I'm relishing my empty nestedness. So looking forward to, or have completed some recent big trips and travel abroad, and looking forward to more of that in the future. As Mary Lynn and I were talking, planning children's weddings and things like that, and kind of funny to call them children, right? Because I guess they're not anymore. But so yeah, fun stuff in my life going on in addition to my professional world. So.
Well, Mary Lynn and I both are travel fanatics too, so we share that passion with you. All right, Mary Lynn, you want to kick us off today?
Yes. So what a few years we've had, Sandra. So, we've both been long in the HR world, the HR trenches, but what we have been through during the pandemic and since the pandemic has really changed the playing field as well as the expectations. So talk to us a little bit about what you see currently in terms of those changes, and how has that evolution changed what organizations need to be looking for as they're determining their HR deliverables, how to manage and lead their HR efforts. It's such an interesting topic at this time.
Absolutely. And I'll give you one word in response to that, and that is complexity. Like, I think that what the pandemic drove was just obviously a sea change in the HR world, a sea change in the workplace, and it's just made it a lot more complex. And that complexity that used to perhaps only exist in very large organizations has trickled down to the smallest of the small organizations. I talk to employers all the time who might have just a handful of employees, and they could have five, right? But they're facing complexities due to, in part, the diverse geographic workplace, right? So the pandemic drove people to not only work from home, and oftentimes to work from wherever. So when you have employers with people everywhere, it can be very difficult to stay ahead of the complexities associated with that. A couple things that come to mind are state labor laws. I think a lot of people don't realize that, we're a fairly regulated state here in Illinois, and in Chicago. I think employers here will, accept that. But I think what employers don't realize is how different things can be in other states, and sometimes even in other municipalities and other jurisdictions. So HR departments have to investigate those things, educate themselves about those things, learn about those things. Again, if you have a large HR team internally, large corporation, maybe that's a little easier to deal with. When you have a smaller organization, that becomes very challenging. So complexity.
More. It is so complex. And while during the pandemic, many organizations kind of turned the other cheek or put their head in the sand and said, people can work from anywhere. We're not going to really deal with making sure that we're set up as legal business entities in various states. But then as time went on, they started realizing, if someone leaves the organization and is wanting to file unemployment, you can get yourself into trouble if your organization has not gone through the necessary steps. So I think some organizations are still catching up and trying to figure out where their employees are, as well as determining if they need policies in place to help regulate or set guardrails around where they're willing to employ individuals.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, two other areas come to mind also, or specific areas come to mind. One is in terms of mandated leaves of absence, whether paid or unpaid, that various states are imposing. That ties back to what the company's own internal policies are. Those things need to be documented, but you need to be adhering to the state rules. So that's one thing. The second thing that pops to mind is a lot of the pay transparency rules that are coming into play. So you've got, rules, states are basically saying, hey, if you're going to post an open position for an employee in our state, you need to be communicating what the potential range is, the pay range is for that position. That is a big, a lot of employers are having a very difficult time stomaching that, especially smaller employers who maybe don't have very rigid compensation structures. They say, well, wait a minute, I'm going to pay somebody why I want to pay somebody. So now they're being forced to potentially say, well, okay, for this particular position, we will pay between, $70,000 a year and $90,000 a year. And a lot of employers don't like that. So, but again, you've got to know what the rules are in the states where you're recruiting or where you could potentially have somebody apply from. And if you advertise a position as fully remote, you could have somebody applying from California, from Colorado, from Illinois, from New York, from wherever. And so you need to be adhering to those, to those various rules. So it's tricky. It's very tricky.
It's very tricky.
Mm-hmm. So I love that you started out talking about how complex it has gotten, because I think at the beginning of the session, I talked about how drastically the, expectations of an HR team has changed over the last few years. Can you talk about some of the skill sets required in your HR department now that might not have been things that we really considered in terms of staffing HR teams in the past?
Yeah, so I think that the complexity has driven the need to better utilize technology to manage this data, right? And to know what information you have about employees and to manage it well. So I think that in terms of a skill set for an HR department, that's definitely been that's been elevated a little bit. I think the other, with the remote, so many employees being remote, the being able to focus on employee engagement and come up with programs that can help managers and supervisors, basically help teams be better engaged is another skill set. So these are very diverse skill sets, and that's part of what, again, makes this so complex. You have data-driven needs on one side, you have employee relations and kind of human needs on the other side. So finding individuals that can address all of those skill sets all at one time is very difficult. This might be just for a minute. This might be a good time to pop up the slide of the employee life cycle that I know I shared previously. Just to get, it'll just kind of, it overwhelms you, right? There's a lot of words on this slide, and I guess what I just wanted to point out is that there are so many components of the employee life cycle and therefore of what HR needs to manage. So the way this slide works here is, up at the top on the right, that's kind of where it starts. So that's where you're going out to market and you're trying to attract people into your organization. So Kathy, I know, from an employer branding perspective, that's probably near and dear to your heart. Then we go into actually recruiting and selecting individuals and then bringing them on board. That's a big technology touch point right now, is how do we ensure that employees get a good onboarding experience, that we're not giving them a stack of paper and saying, hey, fill this out, because if they're in a different state, you can't even do that anymore, right? So that's definitely an area where technology is kind of emerging in a much bigger way. Training and development, back to the complexity thing, back to regulations. Many states are now requiring employers to train their employees on sexual harassment prevention. So, again, before, maybe you could just, do a short presentation internally or hand out some papers or have somebody sign a policy. But now you've got to have an hour-long, 2-hour-long, whatever the state is dictating, interactive training program covering these bullet points. So it's very important. So a lot of employers are, are seeking out learn management systems, which are basically portals through which you can host a wide variety of training sessions on behalf of your employees. So again, that used to be only in the realm of large corporations, but that has trickled down also to the smallest of the small employers, because states are mandating that certain training be done for everybody. Then you come around to the engagement piece, engaging and managing performance. So not only engaging the employees and making sure they feel part of the team if they're working remotely, but also evaluating their performance, right? How do you measure, other than by walking around and seeing if people at their desk, how are you measuring the outputs of what somebody is doing day in and day out? Rewarding and retaining, that speaks to the compensation piece. Again, back to the whole recruiting and the ranges of which you're willing to offer compensation, and then separating, the moving individuals properly out of an organization should they choose to leave or should they no longer be a fit. So just wanted to share this. We don't really need to keep this up here, but we certainly talk about it. But, there's just so much involved throughout the entire life cycle. And there are individuals in the HR field that focus on one of these bullet points. And there are others that are generalists that need to touch many, or if not all of these, especially within a smaller organization. And maybe just to explain what I mean by smaller, when I say small, I would say an employer, say under 100 employees. Those employers of that size, I consider them smaller. Everybody kind of has a different definition of that. So just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes we break it down a little differently, whether we're talking about revenue size or headcount size. I agree. I think it's even a few years ago, the idea of having one resource that could really manage the full ecosystem of the employment experience. The requirements of today's HR department is so diverse. I mean, I don't know any unicorns that can really perform all these skill sets in a really high level like you really required in today's human capital
Mhm.
strategies.
Yeah. And if people are still scratching their head as, what does HR have on their plate? If that visual doesn't just, right, there is so many challenges as well as opportunities in each of those categories, right? And to Kathy's point, many of them take really unique skill sets. And for small organizations, and we often also define small as under 100 employees, and a vast majority of HR Sources members are in that small category. They do not have the in-house expertise to stay on top of all of those areas in any given period. So as we look at 2024 and all of those different areas, Sandra, how do you see organizations prioritizing kind of some of the top issues that are coming at us?
Mhm.
How are you responding to and helping organizations determine where to put their resources, what things to be most concerned about when that, because you can get fairly overwhelmed by looking at that list and thinking, where the heck do I start? And you read the headlines day in and day out, and they don't necessarily give you great comfort that the road is going to be smooth and easy ahead, right?
Mhm.
When I read the statistics on employee turnover and recent college grads, saying that they might stay with their employer a year, I'm like, this churn and this challenge to recruit and retain talent is not going to get magically easier, you know, and that doesn't even take into account what's going to happen with the economy or if we're really going to have a recession. These labor market issues are here for a while. There's no
Mhm.
question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, we get sometimes sucked into broad statistics. We hear about at a national level what the unemployment rate is, or at a national level, the tech sector is falling apart and laying off everybody. But I always encourage employers, like, bring it down to your level, bring it down to your local market, to your specific industry, and look at a more of a take a more of a micro approach, right? Don't get pulled into these statistics, because the reality is it's your reality. What your reality is in your particular market with your industry is what's important. And I think within an organization, you were asking about, well, where does an employer start? How do they begin to tackle this? I think one tool, obviously, it sounds a little I don't know, maybe a little hokey, but you really got to ask your employees, right? You really have to survey your workforce, whether that's formally or informally, to understand what kind of issues you have. I think you have to start by figuring out what pain points exist in your organization. So sometimes companies come to me and say, we can't hire people. We need so badly to fill seats. How do we solve that problem? Or companies come and say, we are just, everybody's working all over the place, everywhere, all over the country. We have no idea what people are doing. We have no good way of measuring their performance. What do we do? So, I think companies kind of innately know where their problem areas are, and they seek out help for those problem areas. You can't tackle everything all at once. But I think you got to look at your business strategy, determine which of those are significantly impacting your business most directly right now, and tackle those first. So, hiring, maybe that's someplace where we should go next. So, if a company says, I cannot fill seats and it's hurting my business, so now what? Now what are we going to do about that, right? I've told a million companies, I don't have a silver bullet for that. First of all, recruiting is hard work. That's why they call it recruiting, right? It's hard work. It's a sales job. It's going out and encouraging people, selling them on an opportunity that you have in your organization. And that takes planning and that takes work. And there's no easy button for that, right? Especially in this, in this environment. So I think, though, too, if I could stay on that topic just for a minute, there are alternatives to hiring, right? So I'm always sharing with employers, do you really need to hire somebody? Like if you have an opening, if somebody just left, what alternatives do we have? Are there alternatives to actually getting your job posting out there, interviewing people, extending an offer, training them? So what do I mean by that? So for example, is there a way to cross train? Another big topic that we haven't touched on yet is, reskilling or upskilling individuals. So here's an example I like to use. So the upskilling and reskilling are two different things. So let's say within the accounting function, within your business, you have a junior accountant and you're a more senior level accountant. You need two people on the team. The more senior level accountant just left, gave notice and left. So can you upskill? Can you provide some training to that more junior level accountant to give them the skills that they need to essentially promote themselves up into that role so that you don't have to hire, or so that you can hire backfill into a junior level position, which might be easier than hiring into that senior level position. So an example of that might be, let's say there's some significant Excel skills needed to create the company's annual budget, right? So, okay, that's a skill that can be learned. So maybe you send that individual, that more junior level person, out for training, teach them how to do it, right? Maybe that's an alternative, right? That will help the business. So that's upskilling. Reskilling is, and I see this all the time, and I'm sure you'll probably get a chuckle at this, where you take an accounting person and say, well, our HR person just left. So, hey, accounting person, you're going to wear the HR hat right now. So I'm sure there are probably people listening to this right now that are laughing as well, because so many times those two functions get lumped together in these smaller organizations under 100 headcount. And people are required to wear both those hats. Now, again, that's fine. That potentially could be done effectively, but that's a whole nother, that's not just go to a class and learn some Excel skills, right? That's taking an accounting person and teaching them an entirely new function within the company. So I've certainly seen individuals that pull that off very well. It's different, right? It's challenging, but that would be an example of reskilling, where you're creating kind of a whole new side to somebody, teaching them a brand new skill set, something that might require external training over a period of time, might even require an investment on behalf of the company in order to pull that off.
To that point, Sandra, I know we all love survey data and statistics and then digging down into it. So we recently did a member survey and we asked a question we had never asked before. And that was, how many of our key member contacts were HR professionals by training, that's their chosen field, and how many was it other duties as assigned? Did they inherit it? Did they get voluntold that HR was now going to be part of their? And it was about 50-50. I was really surprised. But to your point, I don't think a few years ago, these terms upskilling and reskilling were not as common. So I don't think people really fully understood, when people had the mentality that human resources is a cost center and you better give it to accounting or finance to control the dollar spend, they weren't really thinking of, this might not be a natural, easy transition, right? That we might not be promoting people who are naturally good at employee relations or at recruiting or sales, like you said. Accounting folks don't necessarily, not all, don't want to paint with a broad brush, but don't necessarily possess those skill sets or are naturally comfortable with some of the things that fall into the HR arena, investigating claims of harassment, or, the list goes on and on. So totally relate to what you said. Great examples. And I think important message there is, do you really need to replace the position? And if you're really challenged, let's look at other options. There are other options, and we're going to delve further into that now, right, Kathy?
Yeah, I think that perfectly tees up the next question, because, this is where the fractional, team comes into play. So how are you, could you potentially augment your team with fractional resources? I feel like it's been around, at the very, low level. It's been, augmenting teams in manufacturing companies or other organizations that needed temporary help. You've seen it at like turnaround companies where you're bringing in a CEO to turn around the business, or you're bringing in a CFO to do a specialized assessment to help get somebody ready to sell their organization. But more and more, we're seeing people embrace the idea of a fully fractional team that
Mhm.
bolts onto their business and helps them scale up or serve in some of the capacities you spoke to, where there may not be somebody on the team, they haven't been able to hire somebody. So talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of fractional teams and how that is working with HR resources.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, you know, thinking back to the employee life cycle, right? There are so many different components of it that, if you're gonna hire in an HR professional into your organization, you need to touch on all of those things, right? You need to have somebody with all of those skill sets. But when you look outside, to an outside organization, that organization is going to pool all of those skill sets together in either one person, or better still, a team of people that can bring those different areas of expertise to bear on that company's particular business. And by doing it on only a fractional basis, a lot of times it's a cost savings play. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's the only reason to do it. There are the skill set, like I said, acquiring the right skill set to perform those various transactions associated with the employee life cycle is a good reason to do it as well. I think that companies get in trouble when they start neglecting the things that they know they should be doing. I also have so many conversations with employers that say, "Oh, I know I should be reviewing my employees, or doing performance reviews annually. I know that I should be onboard, doing a better job of onboarding them. I know I should be making sure they get the right kind of training. I know I need an employee handbook that's up to date. Ours is 5 years old." They know that, but they don't have the resources to put to it. So when you look to an outsourced provider, that's how you get those resources, right? Because all of those things, I know when we work with employers, we're very conscious about making sure that we're pushing the envelope. Like, we're pushing the envelope and making sure that the employer is doing what the employer already knows they should be doing, but
Right.
just doesn't have the time, right? So I think that's a big advantage, especially because there are so many different components now to that life cycle.
And we did get an interesting question. I think that it was asked that are HR leaders now responsible for the positioning and differentiating as their companies compete for top talent. I think it really goes right back to what we talked about earlier in recruiting. What are truly the skill sets? It's almost like a sales role now. How do you are those some things that people are doing in terms of outsourcing for HR competencies that were not naturally on teams before, that kind of life cycle communication strategy for employees?
Well, let me speak to the HR side, and then Kathy, you can speak to the marketing side of this, right? Because they really run hand in hand. And I think that so a lot of times what I see employers do, and again, this is because of bandwidth concerns, they just don't have the time, or they just don't have the understanding. They take a job description, they take a bullet point list of things that an employee needs to do in that job. They, copy and paste it out into Indeed, out into LinkedIn, pick your platform, and that's their job ad, right? So a job description and a job ad, or a job description and a job posting, are two very different things, targeting a different audience, and need to be constructed differently. So employers need to get away from the whole bullet point list of stuff and make this enticing, right? They need to make it so that the person reading that ad goes, "Oh, I can see myself in that role. I can see myself working for that company. Their mission seems to align with the things that are important to me," which is very big in the younger generation right now. They want to know that that company has values. They want to know what those values are, and they want those values to align with their own. So you can't convey that in a bullet point list of job duties. It's got to be part of an enticing job advertisement.
Yeah, I just did a favor for somebody. They're like, we can't hire for this advanced management position, and I read the job posting. I'm like, oh my gosh, it sounds like the worst job ever. So I just said maybe we, talk about some of the career building opportunities and the, some of the fun parts of this position and limit some of the job descriptions. You can use, really talk about a day in the life or a week in the life when you're in the interview process, but don't kill your chances of getting a quality candidate because your job description is just
Yeah.
super, just uninviting. So,
Right. And what does your company stand for? I mean, because that's what will draw people in, and what opportunities they have. So back to the whole, everything's all tied together, right? Back to the whole upskilling opportunities. If they take this role, what will they have the opportunity to learn? When they come to work for the company. Well, how are they going to advance? What are they going to learn that they don't know today? So
exactly.
I wanted to add just a couple. Go ahead, Kathy.
I just always go back. One of my favorite examples of that is enterprise, where they, they're low. Their first entree point of hiring is somebody that's going to be parking cars and dealing with cranky, people that are returning on their car from their vacation and have to hustle to their flight. But they have such a great way of showcasing the career pathing opportunities for how you get from that job to a really senior level management position. And if you can endure a couple years, you really have some, high potential growth opportunities with that organization. So I think, even showing that career advancement opportunity in your communications is just, it's so needed, and really can get somebody to be enticed to take on a role they might not want to do long term, but as a stepping stone to future career advancement.
And, tying that back in, then what's super important is then once that individual does, they hire, right? It's a successful hire. They bring somebody in the organization because they told them about all these things that are going to happen. Then they actually have to make them happen, right? The employer has to follow through and make sure that those things are continually communicated, and that they're following through on them. Otherwise, it's going to fall flat very, very quickly.
Back to the question about communications. I am so encouraged by the number of HR teams who are working so much more synchronistically with marketing teams and communication teams. I was just meeting with one of our members, and they even moved one of their communications positions under the HR umbrella because they felt they really needed to ensure that their outbound messaging involving their products and their services was neatly, cleanly, perfectly synced up with all their employee communications, that their employment brand had to be perfectly messaged in a way that, enforced and reinforced what they were saying to their customer base. So I'm really encouraged, and I know Kathy, and the work you're doing, you're seeing a lot more of that, where the HR and the communications and marketing teams are fully integrated, if not, reporting up to the same individuals in the organization or working with outsourced consultants. It's a much more integrated effort than I ever used to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think, HR leaders recognize this gap many years ago, but they just weren't getting budgets to really address the issue of communication and employer value proposition and positioning in their hiring practice and retention practices. So I think we're seeing that, we talked about it as a cost center, and I do feel like businesses are seeing it if they don't have people, it's limiting their ability to grow their organization. So it truly is a growth lane, and there's a lot of ways to make it not a cost center, and really, really look at your HR practices as cost. There's some cost reduction opportunities, whether it's outsourcing or, improving your hiring practices with better technology and communication plans. So,
one of the areas I see that play out a lot, Kathy, I think, and maybe you've seen the same, is in the area of employee benefits, right? So, companies spend so much money on providing a benefit package to their employees, and that too can fall flat if it's not explained well, promoted, where employees understand their costs, the benefits that they're receiving, their eligibility, all the other nice to haves that kind of go along with some of the plans that are kind of core to the business. So, promoting that again as a tool, as a way for the employer to say, look at all these things that I'm providing to you, and packaging it up nicely, logoed, branded, distributed, communicated, to your point, that's definitely an area where I think a lot of companies could do better on.
Definitely.
Absolutely. I think it's, even myself, I'm like, oh, I forgot we even had that
Yeah.
perk. So yeah, but it's like any kind of message when you talk about sales, nobody buys typically everything you offer. So nobody remembers everything you offer either. So you have to constantly keep that top of mind in your employment communications. So what are some of the types of companies that benefit from a fractional staffing strategy when it comes to HR resources?
Yeah, I would say companies that have a geographically dispersed workforce because of all the, like I was saying earlier on, because of all the challenges associated with that from a compliance point of view. Organizations that are, they've got, we were talking a little bit before about, they've got a lot of different people wearing the HR hat, right? So, sometimes it's just accounting kind of wearing the HR hat. Sometimes it's taking those things in the employee life cycle, and all kinds of people within the organization are wearing that hat. So pulling that all together under the umbrella of an outsourced organization can definitely help the company function better from an HR perspective. So you can have somebody drive some of the hiring activity from a recruitment point of view, as opposed to having your line supervisor trying to interview for frontline. You can streamline some of those kinds of things. So organizations too, a lot of times we wind up getting involved because a company loses their HR person and they say, well, do we really want to go back out and hire? Or we've tried to replace this person, we haven't really found the right person. So just from a staffing perspective, or from a consistency perspective, they don't want a revolving door of HR people. They want a consistent experience. So there's another reason to potentially look at outsourcing. Some companies will say, hey, I've got a great HR professional on my team. I'm not going to outsource just to save, a little bit of money. This person's doing well. But again, if that person leaves, now what? Now what are we going to do? It's a good opportunity to look at that. And I just want to add one thing in case this is on anyone's mind, is that HR outsourcing is different than it is not a co-employment relationship. So you may have heard of a PEO, professional employer organization, that businesses go to actually be the employer or the co-employer of their employees. HR outsourcing is different. HR outsourcing brings the expertise, brings the manpower, brings the knowledge, brings the time, and provides those services for a fee, but does not take on a co-employment relationship. So the advantage to the employer in that case is they retain complete control over what they're doing. The policies are still theirs. They still choose their own benefits. They control the costs. It's all still under their control. So I just want to point out the difference there between HR outsourcing and a PEO type arrangement.
Sandra, that was so well said, because we often get confusion around that topic. People think HR source is a PEO because we have some complementary services that appear to be PEO-like, but we are an employers association. I know you are not a PEO, but there are many employers out there who are looking at both options, and they think they're one and the same. Right. And I always say we are completely different types of organizations. It's a different decision to decide to move towards a PEO. So if I look at my Wayback Machine, which the last big recession seems like an awfully long time ago, 2008 to 2011, I think a lot of organizations during that period, where the gig economy and fractional services of all types really started coming into widespread acceptance, a lot of what was driving that was fear around hiring FTEs when you had potentially just laid off a number of individuals. Mm-hmm. Now, I love what you had to say about it's often additive, or it's for specific skill sets or projects. And in some instances, it's driven by the fact that the employment market is so tight, and it's difficult to find full-time team members if that's what you're looking for. But I feel like the reasons for going with an outsourced option have evolved over time and are much broader than they once were. So organizations of all types, to your question, Kathy, earlier about who might consider this, I feel like all sorts of organizations, large, small, early startup organizations, mature businesses in almost every industry might be great candidates for outsourcing some of these parts of the employee life cycle, right? Mm-hmm. And it might be a great long-term solution or just an episodic, short-term, project-based option. What do you think? Am I out there, or do you agree if this is what you're seeing as well in the marketplace?
One of the things I see that I think is very telling is that organizations that kind of get it from an outsourcing perspective want to outsource everything, right? So they might already be outsourcing their IT function. They might already be outsourcing their finance and accounting function. And so if I meet them and I talk about outsourcing HR, they get it. They're into it, right? Then they're evaluating that the way that they're evaluating that option the way that they should. Employers that I meet that don't outsource anything have a harder time getting there, right? They've got to understand better, what does an outsourcing arrangement look like? How does it work? What are the pros and cons to me? How do I manage a vendor? Sometimes I feel like I need to tell employers how to manage us. Like, here's how our relationship needs to work. Here's how we need to interface so that we can do our job for you, and educate them on how to do that, so that they then go, okay, this outsourcing thing, I get it. I understand how it can work for my business in a wide variety of areas. Marketing too, Kathy, right? I mean, that's another one of those functional areas.
I sometimes feel like there's, people don't not choose us. They just choose not to do anything different. Yeah. So but to your point, if somebody is really used to the gig economy and has had a good experience with it, they're way more ready for that kind of relationship, to bring in that really specialized expertise, not have to ramp somebody up because they don't have the internal capability to do that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of great reasons, but we do hear rationale where they do think that they need somebody on the shop floor. They need somebody that, can handle a daily incident report, because they're not going to be somebody that's outside of their organization is not going to be as accessible. So, I think you do have to kind of weigh both options, because there are some times it really does make sense to have an internal resource too, or in addition to a partner.
Yeah. They're definitely right. It's certainly not a one size fits all. There are certain exceptions. And I will tell you that one area that I've historically struggled with convincing somebody is outsourceable is this whole building of internal culture, right? So if you have a culture problem, that's not really something you can have somebody on the outside work on for you. That's going to be a lot more challenging.
Yeah. And I think that really goes right into, our employees' expectations have really changed. I mean, I think that, we probably all work for companies or are running companies that really are truly, our heart is in the right place in terms of what the experience that we want for our employees. But talk to us a little bit about what are you seeing happening in terms of that, and how our outsource teams, or how are people addressing the changing expectations that impact culture and engagement strategies.
So in terms of employee expectations, I think that because when we provide HR outsourcing services, we are employee facing. So it's not just the leadership team. It's not just managers that are coming to us. It is, every single employee in that organization. And their expectations are surprisingly aligned. They just need answers, right? So they just need to be able to email, text, pick up the phone, call and get an answer as to, I need to change my direct deposit. How do I do that? I'm getting married. I need to change my benefits. How do I do that? I don't understand the PTO policy. Explain that to me. My PTO balance might not be right. I don't see where that is in the handbook. Explain that to me. They just want answers. And we spend a lot of time focusing on not only on maintaining our HR expertise, but on being good customer service people and being responsive to employees. And, the younger generations especially don't expect to be able to walk down the hall to talk to HR, right? But they do expect support. They do expect the workplace support that they need, and they need to be able to get it at the time they want it, when they want it, using the communication method that they want. So that has aligned very well. I think, for more traditional organizations with leadership that perhaps is of a different generation with a different belief about how HR is supposed to work, maybe HR does need to be down the hall. But I think for the most part, the outsourced model will meet employee expectations as long as the services being provided are prompt and accurate, and done with the human touch, right? We spend a lot of time rapport building. Building rapport is still important to HR, but actually, truthfully, building rapport is important in any business, right? It's just as important in accounting as it is in HR. It's relationships, so still very important.
And in our outsourced relationships with our members, we've certainly found that it requires leadership support. And so the way the organization is introduced, as well as the way the HR partners or HR consultants are introduced and onboarded also into the organization and integrated, can really help improve the situation and improve those relationships. And then as long as communication channels are open and expectations are clear, and sometimes it takes the outsourced professional to raise the flag and say, I need more face time with the team. I need more visibility. It would be very helpful if I was involved in these meetings or received communications on these issues, because I'm getting faced with employee relations concerns and I don't understand the backstory because I'm not here enough hours a week, or I'm not included in these critical communications. So that expectation setting, as well as open communications, making sure that, I loved what you said before, Sandra, about ensuring that they know how to manage the outsourced professional, right? What should they expect? But then also what the expectation is on the outsourced professional side to be most successful.
Mm-hmm. And every company is going to be different. I think,
Yes.
we operate in a very industry agnostic arena, but are fully aware that providing HR support to, say, a law firm or some sort of professional services firm is extraordinarily different than providing that same service to a manufacturing facility, right? Different demographics, different, different expectations. Back to your point about, question about employee expectations. They're going to expect different things. They need to be communicated. One of the questions we ask new employers when we're working with them for the first time is, what's the optimal method of communication with your employees? Is it email? Is it phone? Is it chat? Is it all of those things? Does it depend on whether it's headquarters or field personnel or whatnot? We ask that question so that we have that clarity, so we don't have any missteps.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's similar, and it's so interesting to listen to you guys both talk, because I think there's so much similarity to how we work with our client partners, and a lot of lessons to be learned and shared between the kind of models. But I've always kind of viewed it as like, we're one team. We might get paid differently. We might have different kind of parameters that we can work with. But if we're really going to perform our best and give you the value you deserve, we really have to act as one team. So if I need to be in this meeting, or I need to communicate with this team on site, that's the kind of relationship we're gonna build with our partners. Well, I want to kind of switch gears and spend the last few minutes just talking about some things that we're using, whether it's technology or trends or AI. What are some of the things that we're seeing more, modern applications of as we think about 2024? What are some things that you guys have been seeing in the space?
Well, I think that, everybody pays people and has a payroll system, right? Everybody's getting that done. But what I've seen trending, again, in the smaller business space, is that employers are saying, I need more than just payroll. I need to be able to track my employee information better. I need employees to be able to access their information themselves and make updates themselves. So employee self-service becomes a part of that. I want employees to be able to enroll in their benefits automatically online instead of, again, filling out, paper forms. So I think kind of taking that, what used to just be kind of a core payroll function, and expanding use of that technology, because a lot of payroll platforms do have added functionality to do a lot of those things. So it doesn't necessarily require a move to a new provider. It's just optimizing what you already have. And what I've found in my experience, those payroll platforms, we call them the P's, right? The Paycoms, the Paycors, the Paylocities, the Paychecks, throw ADP in the mix. They're not a P, but all of those companies that we all have heard of, they're chomping at the bit and are adding functionality because they know employers are demanding it, and they want to sell more of that. They want employers to utilize more of that. It makes their business relationship more sticky, right? So I think that's a big thing that's trending right now in terms of technology use.
Agreed. And just to add on to that, we're finding that a lot of organizations, they need help researching what options there are, determining how to transition, trying to figure out, are they being sold a bag of goods, or is this something that's really going to bring them efficiencies, really improve the employee experience? So some of the work that, outsourced professionals are doing are helping organizations do the research and figure out how to transition and implement some of these platforms. Add to that AI and all of the potential and current applications of generative, technology, ChatGPT, on writing job descriptions, writing job postings, drafting employee communications. We're seeing a lot of experimentation, little risky in some arenas with regard to this arena, kind of, uncharted territory that organizations are trying to figure out. I'm guessing very soon we're going to see a lot of policies and hopefully not too many lawsuits in the near future, but many organizations are starting to experiment. But technology to improve employee engagement, improve the employee experience, and improve efficiency is super important and trending in the HR arena like never before.
Mm-hmm. I've seen one of the payroll providers that I just mentioned has a neat little function that they just added, where when you are creating your open enrollment communication, kind of your email, so to speak, that's going to go out to everybody to give them some action steps and tell them what to do. It has a tool in there that enables you to kind of just use AI to give it a few parameters, and then it'll write it for you. So it's just a great way, talk about enhancing communication, you talk about branding, you talk about all these things that we've been talking about for the last hour, and it just does it, quick and easy. And you review it, of course, you read it through, make sure it's appropriate, aligned with, your messaging, but it just makes it so easy. I know as somebody who writes a lot and thinks a lot about, I think a lot about my writing. I'm very meticulous in my writing. It can take a long time to draft something and to redraft and to edit and to make it sound just right. And I think HR people can sometimes struggle with that. So if they can get a leg up, I look at it as just a leg up, right? It's just to make it a little bit more efficient, a little easier, but still get the job done the way we know we should. So that's a really cool thing. So I think, to your point, Mary Lynn, it's starting to trickle in to some of the tools that we're using, and I love it. I think it's fantastic, and I'm excited to see where it's going.
Yeah, I agree. I think that automation and AI are going to really enable us to be more high touch. I mean, that's the way we've used automation in a lot of more, sales oriented applications. But I see, same types of experience can be created for recruiting and retention, and then giving us more time back to do that personal outreach, or have more one-to-one conversations, because we're not spending as much time on things that are low calorie efforts.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we've got one question, and then I'm going to have to move to close. But how can HR and marketing teams ensure that their goals and metrics are aligned, fostering a cohesive approach to achieving both internal and external objectives? Oh, that's, an easy question.
Sounds like a whole nother hour to me. We'll go ahead, Kathy. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm going to look at it from the standpoint of, I think you have to start with setting an agreed set of goals and KPIs that you're going to look at. So if you're, thinking one thing and the marketing team is thinking one thing, that you're never going to have alignment on operations. So, really getting the teams together, really creating those goals together, and then, figuring out how to make them smart so they're measurable, and you've got some inputs in place that are going to be able to give you that analysis at the end. But yeah, I it was kind of a softball question. But yeah, we could spend a whole hour on unpacking that one for sure.
Right.
Well, I am, as always, we've got 5 minutes left, but I want to, give everyone an opportunity to see how they can connect with you, Sandra. Really appreciated all the incredible insights you shared, Mary Lynn. Of course, you as well. You always have some great input and can add some color to every conversation. So Sandra is open to receiving some one-on-one questions. So if you want to reach out to her via LinkedIn or her email address, we've shared it here. And just put business as unusual in the subject line so she knows your question is coming from our session today. I also want to thank our sponsors who support the Business as Unusual series, Insperity, M3 Learning, and Mary Lynn's organization, HR Source. And we are going to, for September's Business as Unusual, sort of stay on the same path around talent strategy. We're going to be talking about how to be committed as an employer to be better in 2024. So employees really want more than a plaque and award saying that you're a great workplace. So they want you to prove it every day. And it takes a lot of self-analysis, a comprehensive plan, and the resources to create that kind of impactful change. So on September 21st, we're going to be bringing Jennifer Kluge, who is the CEO of the National Association of Business Resources, probably known best for what they do in terms of hosting and doing the surveys for the best and brightest companies to work for awards that are local to a lot of different regions. But we're really going to dig into beyond getting that plaque or recognition and understanding how you can use these best practices. I think Sandra touched on this as well. Like, how can you use some of the information that you're seeing in the marketplace that are organizations that are your size? What are they offering their employees in terms of benefits and perks and learning and development opportunities? And we're going to be digging into how you can use those types of competitions or workplace accolades to really hone your workplace and employee engagement strategy. So again, I want to thank both Sandra and Mary Lynn for joining me today. It was such a pleasure. It's such an interesting topic, and I really enjoyed having you both on today's session.
Well, thank you, Kathy. It was really fun to participate and it's a good topic to talk about. So thank you for having me.
And as always, thanks, Kathy. Love working on these with you.
Thank you. All right. Until next time, registration will be open shortly. So we'll see you in September for the next session of Business as Unusual.